It's all about money. With your host, CPA and forensic accountant, Sam Rosenfarb.
You're watching It's All About Money. Nobody knows more about money than accountants. Hi, I'm Sam Rosenfarb. I'm a forensic accountant. I've been an accountant for over 30 years, and I can tell you from experience that most people are irrationally motivated by money. I've been involved in partnership disputes involving partners who've known each other for 10, 20, 30 years, who virtually kill each other over money. I've seen people steal from the government, cheat on their taxes, steal from their employers, steal from their investors, and even steal from their children's trusts. This show is all about educating you, teaching you all about how the financial aspects of your life can be controlled, how you can spend, invest, control, and maintain money in its proper place in your life. Today's show is about your money and how it's at risk. What's the difference between investing $10,000 in shares of AT&T or the same amount in Bob's Deli? What is this risk of equity investment? How do these risks compare to other types of investments? What should you be looking for when investing in a small business? What are your rights? What are your obligations if someone steals from a small business that you've invested in? Our guest tonight will lend extremely deep insight into these areas based on their vast knowledge and expertise in the law. William Robertson III was born in Charleston, West Virginia, been admitted to the bar since 1967. He's been practicing at the Wayne, New Jersey law firm of Williams, Kalari, Miller, and Otley since 1969. His practice includes business planning for corporations and individuals. He's a graduate of Harvard Law School and a member of the New Jersey State Bar Association. Also with us is Marc Press. He's a member of the law firm of Raven, Saracen, Cook, Baumgarten, Fish, and Rosen of West Orange, New Jersey. Of Roseland, New Jersey. They used to be in West Orange. Mr. Press previously served as bank counsel at the Trust Company of New Jersey and had been an associate with Davis, Polk, and Wardell in New York and McCarter and English in Newark, New Jersey. Mr. Press specializes in the area of corporate law representing small and medium-sized corporations in the areas of corporate finance, mergers, acquisitions, and general corporate matters. He's a 1983 graduate of Duke University, where he's a member of the Law Review. Marc, is it different representing banks compared to individuals?
Oh, absolutely.
It is?
Sure. Banks, well, you're dealing with a highly regulated entity. It's an institution. You only have one client, of course, but...
What did you do for banks, generally? What was your role as bank counsel?
My role was reviewing loan documents, commitment letters to various borrowers, dealing with loan workouts where borrowers get in trouble, and the bank would hopefully try to work it out with them. In the event that didn't take place, we'd have to resort to litigation, foreclosure, and working with outside counsel on those.
So you're the guy that put
things.
a lot of debtors into bankruptcy. That was your job.
A few from time to time.
Well, what's your area of specialization? What do you concentrate in?
At the moment, I'm spending a lot of time on litigation involving closely held businesses, investments by people that turn sour.
Right.
Over the years, I've been involved in a number of different areas, including business transactions, planning.
What is commercial litigation? What does that mean to our viewers?
That means money. Trying to get your money back.
Suing for money.
Suing for money.
Or being sued for money, either or?
Or being, yep, you can be on the defense side.
Is that what you do with the firm? Represent both the plaintiff side and the defense side?
Either one. The issues are the same, and if you're representing both sides from time to time, it sharpens your skills in handling a case on either side.
What kind of matters are brought to you at your law firm, Marc?
Well, they can run the gamut from representing small investors trying to set up a business, incorporating it, or existing businesses trying to raise capital where they're going out to various investors who are looking to put money into the business.
Is it easy to raise capital today?
There's a lot of capital out there. There's a lot of money out there. That doesn't mean that it's always available. Everybody likes to think that their business or that the widget that they've just invented is the greatest thing since sliced bread. So it's a matter of having something that attracts investors, obviously, like biotech. Software companies are very hot. There seems to be a lot of money chasing after those types of deals. But there's, what the individual business owner has to determine is, what are they willing to give up to get this money? There's a certain degree of control and autonomy that they may lose.
How does the investor decide what the level of risk is? Are there various levels of risks in different investments?
Absolutely.
And
all levels
how do
of
they
risk.
run?
And there are different components of risk too. But investment in a small, closely held business typically would involve a much higher degree of risk than investing in something that's already traded, that's regulated, a big company on the stock exchange.
How does an investor determine the level of risk that's being asked of him?
Well, many investors can determine that through their own experience. They've had experience in making different types of investments. Many investors have, unfortunately, imperfect information when they're making the investment. They are put upon by a friend or an advisor to make an investment, and unfortunately, many times they don't appreciate the risks.
What should they do? What should a friend do if he's being asked by one friend to invest in his widget company?
Yeah, well, I think you have to draw the distinction. If all you have in life is $10,000, maybe AT&T or a bond makes some sense here. AT&T, there's lots of liquidity. The downside risk is very small.
Liquidity means that the investor can sell at any time.
That's correct.
And change his investment into cash.
Right, exactly. And that's the advantage of that type of investment. There's less risk. There's some market volatility, as we've seen lately. But if you're investing in the small business, you really have to be prepared, it seems to me, to lose all your money. That's a risk that you take. Of course, the upside is much greater. But I think one thing you need to do is, first step is, of course, you need to become knowledgeable about the business, and that's a matter of getting information, getting financial statements, maybe bringing those financial statements to their accountant, that could be Sam, to review those and to see, what sort of financial condition
With
the
the
company's
stock
in.
market growing at 25–30% a year for the last 3 years, does it make sense to invest in these closely held businesses at all?
Absolutely. If you're going to be investing in a closely held business, you should be looking for a much higher return because your risk is higher.
And could the returns be greater than 30%?
The returns could be greater easily.
Have your clients experienced returns that?
Well, you and I, a number of years back, worked on a transaction in which some individuals bought a division from a much larger company, invested something in the magnitude of maybe $300,000.
Right, about 10 people invested,
Yeah.
approximately $30,000 each.
Right, now for the first year or so, I recall getting a lot of phone calls saying that, this product isn't moving, we're going to have to move into some other areas, I don't know if we're going to make it, the bank's breathing down my neck. Well, recently I understand that this company received an offer of well in excess of $15 million for this company.
Right, it's $20 million. $20 million for a $300,000 investment. So each of the investors who invested $30,000, it's only been 8 years.
Right.
8 years ago, we're going to wind up with $2 million for the $30,000 investment. Right. That's that happens.
And not to repeat exactly the same story, but I was involved in a transaction several years ago in which two people that were employed by a parent company were offered the opportunity to buy one of the subsidiaries that they were familiar with. I think
There's someplace where they work?
Where they worked, their actual out-of-pocket investment was $5,000.
$5,000.
Although they did have help from a bank that loaned another $1.3 million.
Right. Was that hard to?
Through leveraged buyout, it was not hard. They had done the cash flow and projected it out, and they convinced the bank that this was a pretty good deal. And within a year, they had sold this business and earned between $3 and $5 million. It was a
for their
$5,000
type
investment? Of deal for their $5,000 investment. So this can happen in a closely held business, but
so how can we tell our viewers where to find these employers who are willing to sell these divisions for $3,000 and $30,000?
Well, typically that's a situation in which you have people who are in the business already. They are given the first opportunity to buy that sort of company. But
what should they do if somebody out there is an employee who's working in a division where the employer wants to dispose of the division? We read about them all the time. Is there any process they should go by, any format, any procedure? Should they be calling the SEC, their accountant, their lawyer, their banker?
Well, typically we're not dealing with in buying that division, you're not dealing with purchasing a publicly traded company. You're buying, maybe a private company, but you're buying a piece of something. So there are generally not securities law concerns raised by that. But certainly finding a good financial advisor is important. Somebody who can understand the cash flow of the business, who can present it in a format that could be taken to potentially outside investors, whether that's a bank, some type of venture capital firm that can provide the working capital that the business will need to go forward. You of course need to consult a lawyer. One thing that has to be taken care of, whereas when you buy AT&T, you're just buying the shares in the company.
You just call a broker and you get your shares.
Right. With small companies, investors typically sign shareholders agreements which define the rights that each shareholder has vis-a-vis other shareholders.
Is it important to have a shareholders agreement, you think, Bill?
Definitely, absolutely.
And should you have a shareholders agreement in all kinds of investments, whether it's a shareholders agreement or a partnership agreement?
Regardless of the
what's
type,
the difference?
Sure. Doesn't make any difference what type of business entity is. The issues are basically the same.
What's the difference between a partnership and a corporation? Does it make a difference to our viewers?
Makes a difference if you invest in a general partnership, then each of the owners of the business, a general partner, jointly manages the companies, but he's also has unlimited liability for all of the debts of the company.
Oh, we don't want that.
Well, that's real bad.
Right.
So
why would anybody form a general partnership?
Well, there used to be a lot more reasons than there are now.
Okay, so there are very few
They were
reasons.
mostly tax reasons. Recently, in New Jersey, as many states across the country, an entity known as a limited liability company.
Is that why we see LLC after so many names?
That's why you're seeing them. It
LLC.
solves all of the problems that partnerships had, which is unlimited liability for the partners, and yet it gives them the same tax advantages of a partnership, which is the flow-through of the tax profits and losses, the avoidance of a double tax, which normally is associated with a corporation.
And this limited liability. So should most investors consider an LLC? Is that the vehicle of choice today, the entity of choice?
It seems to be, it is the entity of choice for transactions where the number of investors are fairly limited. Where you're dealing with large numbers, companies that ultimately may go to the capital markets or to more traditional forms of venture capital financing. Limited liability companies are fairly new, and I'm not sure that the street per se is ready to accept them. They're a little more cumbersome from a tax standpoint in certain ways, because partnership accounting, as you know, is somewhat complex and complicated, and the public markets are used to corporations. So what I've seen them, 5 to 20 investors usually is about where these where LLCs tend to reach their limits.
Some limited partnerships are publicly traded. Is there a risk to investors in investing
Limited partnerships are very complicated, and these days you're seeing fewer of them. They've gotten a bad name because of what happened to them, particularly in real estate transactions in the 1980s, where they were highly touted. Unfortunately,
they were primarily tax-driven entities.
They were tax-driven entities, and the limited liability
They're primarily tax shelters, is that what?
Well, not necessarily tax shelters, but there were tax benefits that were not present in a regular corporation.
And so how can an investor protect himself in these limited partnerships where they go bad?
Well, I was going to say, typically you're going to buy these from a broker. And you're going to receive a prospectus, and you're going to receive an offering memorandum or private placement memorandum, where you'll receive some disclosure about the financial condition of the entity.
I don't want to cut you short, but we'll be right back after a short break with Bill Robertson and Marc Press talk about what is a prospectus.
That's my best friend, Jake. A few years back, his brother died of AIDS. It was the hardest time of his life. Mine too. That's why when Jake asked me to volunteer in a kitchen that prepares food for homebound people with AIDS, I knew I could make a contribution. At first, I did it to make Jake feel good. But after volunteering a year now, I do it to make me feel good. You can help. To find out more about the food service provider near you, call the number on your screen.
Hi, you're watching It's All About Money, and we're talking with Marc Press and Bill Robertson about how you can protect your investment in a small business or a partnership or a publicly traded entity. Marc, right before the break, you were talking about getting a prospectus. What does that mean? Tell us what that is.
Well, it's a disclosure document. Whether it's a prospectus, which deals with a registered public offering, or a private
All
placement.
public companies are required to issue these prospectuses?
When they sell securities, if they don't otherwise have an exemption. And in that case, it describes the company, it describes their financial condition, recent developments about the company, depending upon the type of offering, what the risk factors, and there will often be a section in these documents called risk factors, and it tells an investor what to watch out for.
And there's always risk.
There's always risk. Obviously, less with the large, well-known companies, the IBMs or the ATTs, and much more with the companies you might see listed on NASDAQ, whether that's the market listing or the small cap listings. Those tend to be your riskier
Now, some
companies.
people get these prospectuses and they just seem like Greek to most people. Should investors give this to a lawyer or an accountant to read, or should they really try to go through it themselves? What's your opinion?
They should go through it themselves. If it's an SEC registered prospectus, the SEC has helped, and the practice of the industry has helped somewhat by requiring a summary section at the beginning. And an investor can usually get through that without choking too badly.
Right.
But the investor should try to read it and not simply accept the recommendation of a broker or whoever is telling him this, because the broker really hasn't got time to explain everything. Even though the broker has concluded it's a good investment, still the investor should understand.
Is there much investor fraud? Are many promoters who obtain money from investors? Is there a high incidence of fraud? Should investors be concerned about that?
Well, I think they should. Fortunately, in my practice, I've not been involved in situations where I've been raising capital for companies that have issued fraudulent disclosure. But it does happen. There's a lot of penny stock fraud that goes on. Companies that have little earnings, little history, and some brokerage firms can control the market in these shares, and it can be very risky, and fraud does take place.
What about investing in just a small company? Is there much fraud in your experience in small investments too?
I would say, other things being equal, that there's a better chance in a smaller company that you can be defrauded or at least inadequately informed. And although that's not an SEC registered transaction, so you don't have prospectus, you don't have the required disclosure that you have in a transaction involving a larger company. So you need to be more aggressive as an investor in seeking the information. And you may want, or you should get the assistance of your attorney and your accountant or other advisor in obtaining that information.
What kind of incidents have you been involved with in dealing with investors and partnerships?
Well, I'll give you one example of an instance where a partnership was offered, a real estate matter. It was a limited partnership, and there were significant disclosures. There was investigation done, but there were some facts about the partners that did not come to light during the investigation, which unfortunately proved to be difficult for the partners later, who, when the general partner actually was taking money from the partnership.
Stealing.
Unknown, stealing,
Right.
Stealing, absolutely, unknown to the investors.
And
So
had they known these facts before, they might not have invested? Is that?
Had they known all of the facts.
Well, that's certainly something which the person raising this money would not disclose willingly. One of the, I guess, concerns with a limited partnership that any investor should have is that they're run by a general partner. As a limited partner, you're a passive investor. With some exception, you have limited say in how that company is run, and the general partner has quite a bit of discretion as to how he runs the business. There are limitations on that, but here's a situation in which...
Greed motivates a lot
Yes.
of transactions, and so greed is inherent in all dealings with the finances, and when a general partner, I guess, controls the finances for the partnership, there's always the tendency, or at least the inherent nature of a human being is to be greedy.
Yeah. I think one of the things when you're talking about investing in small companies, is sort of coming back to what we discussed a little bit earlier, was that if you're in a small company, it's important that you review make sure somebody looks at the shareholders agreements, the bylaws, or whatever else can define rights, because often, and I've seen this, those don't exist, or they don't adequately deal with situations where one of the principals of the company might become ill and disabled and no longer can run the business.
The formalities of the business aren't maintained.
Right, and what do you do in that situation? If you're now running the business, but one of the other principals is ill, do you need to keep running the business on his behalf, or should you have the ability to buy back his shares at some pre-described price or formula? These things create litigation all the time. I'm involved in a couple of them presently, and had we had better drafted shareholders agreements, these issues wouldn't have come up.
How do you get involved in commercial law rather than criminal law or matrimonial law? What brought you to this field? Did you make these decisions in law school? Did you decide when you were in law school that you didn't want to do criminal law or matrimonial law? Or how did this specialty develop for you?
I guess I was just attracted to it because of...
in law school?
Yeah, in law school. Already the concepts, you take a broad array of courses in law school, and the concepts in the business area appealed to me.
So you always wanted to be a business lawyer?
Well, the courses appealed to me, that and tax work, a related field.
And you too, Mark? This was something that you started in law school?
Well, I guess after my second year, it's fairly typical. You do a summer associate, spend some time at a law firm, and I just found litigation, frankly, there's a lot of wasted time, a lot of motions thrown back and forth, needless discovery in some instances. I found that doing corporate work, you have a beginning point and an end point, and I found it much more fulfilling.
It's a purchase or a sale or an investment.
That's right.
Has the law changed much in the last, since you've been practicing? Has practicing changed? Law firms, law practice, clients, matters?
Well, I started at a very large Wall Street firm. Practice tends to be institutionalized, long hours, all night, fairly typical. My practice is a little more sedate than that by choice now. But I don't think the law has changed that much.
The Wall Street law firms still practice all night?
Oh, absolutely, sure.
The associates are still working 90 hours a week?
If they're lucky, maybe more.
More than that. That doesn't happen in suburban New Jersey, does it?
Not as frequently, no.
Yeah, once in a while you'll have a transaction that requires the all-nighter, but typically that's not the case.
What should investors look out for? Somebody's approach to invest in a business, what should they look out for? What are some of the red flags that they should be wary of?
One of the red flags is who is approaching you to make the investment, and do you know them? How well do you know them? What is your relationship to them? And who's paying them to advise you to get into this investment? Sort of a follow the money kind of thing.
So if it's a broker who's working on commission, that should be a little red flag.
Well, it's...
as opposed to a relative.
If it's a broker that you've known and you've come to depend upon over the years, that's one thing. If it's somebody just calling you on the phone and you never heard of them before, then that's another thing.
These guys are persistent that call. They call all the time, and they're very persistent.
Yeah. Well, another thing I think you should look at is take a look at the financial statements. See how leveraged the company is. In other words, how much debt does that company have, and what type of debt is it? Is it what's known as asset-based lending, or if they factored their receivables, that is, they've sold them? It means they're not as financially strong as a company which might not need to resort to that type of capital.
Is it generally safer to invest in a business that already exists as opposed to a business that's a startup? Right?
Yes.
It's safer to invest in.
Well, you have a history, and while the past performance certainly is no guarantee of what's going to happen in the future,
right. We've
quote
all
unquote,
seen those ads, right?
That's true, but there is some history. There's something there. There may be some assets that you can evaluate that cut your risk. By the same token, it may cut down your potential gain too.
Right, the larger the risk, the larger the gain potential.
There it is.
If you ask a lawyer or an accountant to review an investment and you follow their recommendations, what exposure do they have? The lawyer or the accountant that you use, do they offer some protection against future exposure? Or?
Well, lawyers and I believe accountants as well, they shouldn't be, if you will, hawking the investment. That's not their job. Some law firms have gotten in trouble recently for that or have been sued for that. Your liability is a negligence standard. You need to represent your client in a professional manner and to represent them fairly. And if you're negligent in that regard, you fail to review the documents and advise them about what those mean, so you have some risk there. But you're not certainly ensuring that they're going to make money on the deal. That's their decision as to whether or not they should be investing.
So do you find the same at your law firm, in representing clients who come to you with investments? It's your role to merely explain it to them, not whether to recommend it or not.
Well, that's, I don't play an investment advisory role, although there's a fine line there. I know in the 1980s, the tax shelters were being sold, and I think I played a valuable role to many clients, just seeing through these claims. You get high valuations of intangible assets, and I remember one time a client was being asked to put $100,000 into a particular thing, and I said, well, go find out what you can buy this for, because it had been valued by an appraiser at $100,000. Well, he went to a local restaurant. It turned out it would cost about $10,000.
$10,000 to buy what they were selling for $100,000.
Yeah, and all he was doing was giving away his money. The investor was being asked to give away his money, and of course he didn't do it. And I think I've saved investors a lot more just by saying, don't do it. I don't consider that really investment advice as much as explaining to them the fundamentals of the
Generally,
investment.
I find as an accountant with my clients, if I say no, it's not a good investment, don't invest it. It's safer to say no than it is to say yes or nothing. Because if I say no, how could I be wrong? But then if I just say no, or if accountants or lawyers just say no, are they really providing service?
Well, you generally find that the client doesn't come to you and say, should I invest? Rather, they bring it to you, and then you begin to look at it, and you may find that there are certain problems with the investment or risks that are attendant with it. At that point, you would then advise them as to what those might be. At that point, they might say, well, should I invest? And you may say, I'm not sure that this is an appropriate vehicle for you.
And sometimes it's better not to invest.
Yes.
With that, we've run out of time. Till next time, this is Sam Rosenfarb for It's All About Money. We've been talking with Marc Press and Bill Robertson about how you can invest your money. If you have any questions or comments about tonight's show, write to me, Sam Rosenfarb, 75 Livingston Avenue, Roseland, New Jersey, 07068, area code 973-535-1300. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Bill.
Sam,
Thanks, Marc.